Hey everybody, Koricon Nala here, and this is my recap and review discussion thing for Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 2, Stormborn. We have a very dense episode. They have a lot of information, and things kind of move very quick in this episode time-wise. Now, if you haven't seen the episode, go watch it first because this is a spoiler recap review. I'm going to be talking about everything. So go watch it, then come back. So spoiler warnings. But we opened up at Dragonstone with Daenerys, and she's talking to Lord Varys about his loyalties, that he had followed her father, then betrayed him and followed the other king and betrayed him, and then now he's following her. And he said, we got some backstory on him, that he had grown up on the streets, that he was sold as a slave, that he's really fighting for the people, and the reason he betrayed her father is because he was crazy. He was a mad king, and that's why he betrayed him. Then he betrayed the next king because again, the people were suffering from it, and so on and so on. But he's supporting her because he chose her, and she was kind of impressed by him being forthright with her and said, okay, swear your allegiance to me, and if I ever start to fail the people, that you will look me in the eye and tell me this and how I'm failing them, but to promise not to go behind her back and betray her. And he swears it. She says, if you break this promise, wagging the finger at him, if you do this bad, then I'm going to burn you alive. And he's like, I wouldn't expect less. The Red Witch, Melisandre, shows up at Dragonstone and tells Daenerys about Jon Snow. Tyrion backs her up, says that he's a good guy, and Tyrion is surprised to find out that he is the King of the North now. So they send a summons to Jon to have him come down to meet Daenerys, and she wants him to bow to her on one knee. Then we get a time jump where we're going straight to Jon right after he gets the raven from Daenerys. So the episode is moving very quickly. They're skipping a lot of things and just going straight from one to another. So we're getting a lot of time going on in this one episode. But Jon Snow and Sansa, they're reading the letter from the raven. And it's quite a predicament. It's too dangerous for him to go and see Daenerys, but at the same time, he needs the support and help to fight the White Walkers. So what do? Do you risk going to see Daenerys because you need the support, or do you not go and risk not having enough men and women to fight against the White Walkers? Then we jump to Cersei, who's talking to Randall Tarley and other lords to convince them to join her to fight against Daenerys, that she has dragons. She's basically saying that Daenerys is a lot like her father, and she's going to destroy everything, and she's crazy. But it's showing that everybody is trying to collect their armies, collect their groups. Daenerys is trying to get Jon Snow, and Cersei is trying to get the other lords in the area. And so all of the armies are getting collected and put together to go into battle. Then we jump to Samwell and Jorah Mormont. They're talking with the Archmaester Ebrose about the grayscale, and he says that he's too far gone, that there's no cure, and if he was anybody else, he would send him to the Isle of the Stone Men to live out his days, but he's going to give him one more day to do what he wishes. And they look at a sword. Basically, he's telling him, you can commit suicide if you wish instead of going to the Isle of the Stone Men, but I'll give you one day to figure that out. Then we jump back to Circe, and she's in the dungeon, and she's looking at the skeletons of the dragons from long ago and trying to find a way of being able to kill them so she can go into battle against Daenerys's dragons. And the main guy, the scientist dude that figures out all this stuff, shows her the large crossbow, and she fires it into the skull of the dragon, the large dragon. And she was all happy. And when I saw that, I was like, yeah, it goes through an ancient dry bone very well, but how would it do up against a dragon scale? Like, would it just bounce off the dragon scale? Is it actually going to go through a dragon scale? I mean, it only went halfway through the skeleton. So there's dragon scale and meat, and then the bone, and it's alive, it's dense, it's not dried out. I don't think that thing would go through the dragon scale. Maybe if they hit it in the underbelly or something. But I have a feeling that those crossbows aren't going to have much of an effect on the dragons unless you hit them in like a very specific spot or something like that. But if you hit them anywhere near a thick scale, it's just going to bounce right off. Or maybe just the tip gets stuck in and the dragon just swats it off, or rubs on it and it pops off or something like that. Then we go back to Greystone, and Yara Greyjoy, Ilaria Sand, and Olenna Tyrell are talking with Tyrion and Daenerys about what they're going to do, and that Yara wants them to attack King's Landing right away with the dragons, just destroy everything. And Daenerys is like, no, no, no. I do not want to be the Queen of Ashes. And Tyrion lays out his plans and her plans for taking it over. And what they want to do is hit King's Landing and Casterly Rock at the same time by having Yara and the Iron Fleet take Ilaria back to Dorne to get the Dornish army, and go to King's Landing to take over the King's Landing with Tyrell's army. And at the same time, the Unsullied and Grey Worm would go to Casterly Rock and take that over. After that, Grey Worm and Missandria, they end up hooking up. But we get a little bit of backstory on Grey Worm, where he was saying, I have no fear. You know, when they were training boys, then they would find everybody's fear. If they're afraid of wolves, they make them sleep with the dogs. If they're afraid of water, they throw them into the water to swim. If they're afraid of heights, they make them climb a mountain. And if they die, they die. If they survive, that's good. But he had no fears. He was the bravest of them all. But he wasn't the strongest or the biggest. And he said, but then I met you, and now I know fear. And of course, she's like, oh. And she said, I have fear also. And they end up hooking up, which was cool. Now they finally got together. I mean, how long has it been that they've been kind of flirting with each other and saying that they, you know, they're attracted to each other kind of thing? It's been a few seasons. So it's nice to see them hook up. It's more of like a, maybe I won't see you again when he goes off to battle. But it's good to see them together. So hopefully he survives the battle at Casterly Rock and they get to get married and have children and live happily ever after. But this is Game of Thrones, so I doubt that'll happen. Then we go back to the Citadel with Samwell talking to Ebrose, and he's telling him about this researcher that had come up with this experimental treatment for grayscale. And Ebrose is like, do you know whatever happened to that guy? And he's like, no, he died of grayscale. Samwell's like, oh, okay. And that's why it's too dangerous and it's forbidden to do. So he still wants to do it, but he knows it's forbidden. He's not allowed to do it. Samwell goes down to see Jorah, who is writing a letter to Khaleesi, basically saying that he's sorry he couldn't cure himself. It was his last letter. But Samuel says, hey, I'm not going to let you die. I knew your father. I was with him when he died, because he's a Mormont. And so he won't let him die, and he's going to try this experimental treatment anyway, even though he's not supposed to, and it's forbidden. So he makes him drink a bunch of alcohol and gives him some leather straps to put in his mouth. And he's like, you can't make a sound. They can't know that I'm doing this. And he's biting down, and then he starts cutting away the ruined skin, the grayscale. Oh my gosh, that was gross. And because of that sequence, so that sequence was gross, but then they had a really disgusting transition from that scene over to area at the inn, where this guy like sticks his spoon into a pot pie, and it's all close up on it, and you see like the gravy and the meat and everything squirt out from the crust like pus, and you're like, oh, the guy's eating it. You're like, oh, and I wasn't hungry anymore. I was hungry up to that point, and then all of my desires to eat anything went right out the window. But after the transition, we see Areas at the inn, and she meets up again with Pot Pie, the guy that she had met when she was leaving before she became a no one. And he basically told her that Jon Snow, her brother, is now the King of the North. There seems to be a lot of people that start getting to know that Jon Snow is the King of the North. I think there was like 3 people that learned that Jon Snow is the King of the North. But she's like, what? And she could have gone to King's Landing to try and kill Cersei, but decides to go north to go and meet her brother and go back home to Winterfell. Going back to the north, Jon finally gets the raven from Samwell to tell him about the dragon glass that was underneath Dragonstone. I don't know why it took so long for that raven to arrive when he was able, timescale-wise in the episode, that he got the raven from Daenerys like the next scene, when Samwell sent the raven last episode. So I'm wondering if the timescale or the time periods for events with Samwell is not happening at the same time as what happened in episode 2. So maybe episode 1, Samwell's story is happening at a different time, or it just took a really long time for that raven to show up. You know, maybe it got lost, flew in the wrong direction by accident, you know, decided to take the long scenic route so it could sightsee. I don't know. But it finally showed up, and Jon Snow was telling everybody that he decided he's going to go and meet Daenerys. But everyone's like, no, you can't do that. It's a trap. And he's like, I'm going to do it. We need her support. And he leaves Sansa in charge, which she wanted to be in charge, but she doesn't want to go up against Jon either. So it was kind of a fortuitous thing. She stopped arguing after that, of course. And Littlefinger was giving her the eye like, oh yeah, we got the power now. Then Littlefinger makes the mistake of going into the crypt where Jon Snow was kind of visiting with the statue of his father, Ned Stark, and basically says, you know, we haven't talked properly. Of course, Jon Snow does not want to talk to him. He doesn't even like the fact that he's there, but he has to tolerate him because he had saved him at the Battle of the Bastards. And he said, you know, don't worry, I'll take care of Sansa. I love her like I did my mother. And of course, Jon Snow's like, oh, hell no, I am not taking that. Grabbed his throat, put him up against the wall, and he's like, if you touch her, I will kill you myself. Littlefinger's like, so that was good. As Arya is traveling north, she stops and she's having a campfire. She stopped for the night. And then a bunch of wolves, a pack of wolves show up. And her dire wolf, Nymeria, dropped by. And she's like, oh, hey, Nymeria, you know, come with me. And at first they didn't recognize each other. But that's because it's been 6 seasons since they've seen each other. I mean, she made her go away in the first season. So she's been living in the wild this whole time. And Nymeria is basically like, no, and just walks off, and all the pack goes with her. At the end of the episode, they have a behind the scenes thing, and one of the producers or the writers was talking about that it's because she's now comfortable in her role in the woods with being the leader of this wolf pack, and that's why she left. Which makes sense. I mean, you could probably get that from watching the episode as well, but it shows that it is Nymeria, even though in the episode when she walks off, Arya was like, oh, it's not you. It was her, the writer, but you have to watch the behind the scenes for that verification. And then the Greyjoys are attacked at sea by their uncle Euron. That kind of surprised me. It came out of nowhere, but epic battle. You've got some cool overhead shots of the boats firing at each other and on fire, but most of it took place on Yara's ship, the main ship, and they had a lot of people fighting hand to hand, which looked really cool because you had a whole bunch of flaming ash all around in the air, and it was a nice ambiance. It looked really cool on screen. It looked really cool. And then Euron captures Yara, and he's staring at Theon and saying, you know, are you going to try and save your sister? Blah, 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 and taunting him. And Theon basically wusses out and jumps overboard to save himself. And so Euron kills Yara and hangs her from the bow of the ship. And that's where we end the episode. So what's going to happen with, since they didn't even get to Dorne to get the Dornish army to go to King's Landing, is Daenerys and Tyrion going to get word that the Greyjoys were basically taken over and destroyed on their way to Dorne before they go to Casterly Rock? Or is the Unsullied already on their way to Casterly Rock and they take that, but King's Landing is left alone? What's the ramifications of that? Are they spreading themselves thin? I don't know. It'd be interesting. But this was a super dense episode. We had a lot of information jumping from character to character. Time scale was very long that they crammed into one episode. So we had a lot of information. I think episode 3 is probably going to slow down a little bit and maybe go over some of the information and allow us to breathe a bit and maybe move the story along. Have Jon Snow meet Daenerys and try and convince her to help him with the White Walkers, but she's going to be like, I have to take the kingdom first, and is going to try and convince Jon to help her take back the 7 kingdoms, and then she will support him with the White Walkers. And he's like, I'm going to need the dragon glass. I need to have people down here mining the dragon glass. And she'll probably give permission for that if he kneels before her and says, I will help you, basically gives his support for taking over the 7 kingdoms. I would like to see if Grey Worm and them are already on their way to Casterly Rock. That would be a cool battle if they do that. Would wonder what happens. I'm sure Euron probably goes back to Cersei after that, but maybe his gift to her that he mentioned in the first episode is just saying that he took out and wiped out the other half of the Iron Fleet. That could be. I thought he was going to try and get Tyrion, but apparently not. So he probably goes back to Cersei and maybe she agrees to marry him. I don't know. But I think our storylines are going to stick with Daenerys and Jon Snow, Jorah and Samwell, and Cersei and Euron. We might get a little bit of the Grey Worm and the Unsullied going to Casterly Rock, but I think we're going to stick with those 3 storylines, and so we may not have a large timescale jump like we did in this episode. But what did you guys think? What did you think of episode 2? Did you think it was too dense, like we got way too much information, or that it flowed pretty well? I thought it flowed all right, but it did jump around a lot. We have a discussion going on. Well, 2 of us do. I don't have a lot of people on my Discord server, but we do have a room on my Discord server for Game of Thrones talk. So if you want to head over there, we talk about it when we're there. So check it out. If you're on VidMe, upvote this, give me a follow and share it around. If you're on YouTube, like, share, subscribe. Tell your friends. And I will see you on the next video.